new details on that deadly accident between a train and a parade float in Texas. In a moment, we'll talk to a couple who was on that float. But first, NBC's Janet Shamlian's in Midland with the latest on the investigation. Janet, good morning to you.
Matt, good morning to you. The NTSB is looking at video from a couple of different sources and says the intersection's warning bells and lights were flashing and sounding as that parade float passed over the tracks. Now, the agency hasn't identified the driver publicly, but says it is planning to interview him today and acknowledges that he did submit a blood sample just after the accident. Meanwhile, the enormity of this tragedy continues to weigh here in Midland. Over the weekend, lines out the door at blood banks and donations have been flowing in. Investigators say the flatbed truck carrying the veterans started crossing the railroad tracks, even though warning bells and lights were sounding and flashing. With information from the train's black box and video from the train and a sheriff's escort car, the NTSB pieced together a timeline. 20 seconds before impact, bells and lights activate at the crossing as the first of two tractor trailers safely crosses the tracks. 13 seconds before, the crossing gates start to come down. 12 seconds before the crash, the second tractor trailer starts across the tracks. 9 seconds before, the engineer sounds the train's horn. And just 5 seconds before impact, the engineer slams on the emergency brake, but it was too late. The train slams into the trailer. First responders say by the time they arrived, the veterans themselves were already helping each other.
For many of them, their training kicked in, and as soon as they jumped off that trailer, they were able to help tie tourniquets and stop bleeding vessels. So I couldn't have done it without their help.
Among them, Tommy Shoemaker, a special operations soldier from Monroe, Louisiana. He was on the first float but raced back to help. His wife said they were trained for tragedy. Shane Ladner was wounded twice in Iraq. He and his wife May are seen in this video arriving in Midland. Both injured, doctors had to amputate one of May's legs. A Facebook page has been set up asking for prayers for the couple. Dr. Stephen Ray, a veteran himself, was in charge of the emergency room as the injured came in. He said even though he's trained to put his emotions aside, it was tough.
And found a veteran in the back room that was still there, he and his wife, and they'd lost everything they had in the wreck. They didn't have identification, they didn't have any money or funding, and he was a paralyzed veteran. Called the pharmacy and told them I would pay for their medications and take care of them. It was an honor to be there and to help the vets.
On Tuesday, investigators will conduct a reenactment on the train tracks to determine what the train engineer could see. Meanwhile, 5 people who survived this accident are still in the hospital, and 4 families are planning funerals and memorials for veterans who survived battle overseas, only to lose their lives here on a city street. Matt, back to you.
Janet Shamlian in Midland for us this morning. Janet, thank you very much. Sergeant First Class Richard Sanchez was thrown from the parade float after he pushed his wife Heather to safety. They're with us exclusively this morning along with their attorney, Bob Potroff. Good morning to all of you.
Good morning.
Sergeant, how you doing?
Good.
Yeah? What's the extent of your injuries?
My back was broken down by the L5 and just kind of waiting to see if we can't get the swelling down around the spinal cord so that I could try and walk again.
How much do you remember, Sergeant, of the impact or the seconds immediately preceding the impact?
Well, it all kind of happens at once, and there's not really any delay in time. But I remember it all from the first time I heard somebody yelling train to the arm coming down on my wife and I, and then me pushing her and me getting thrown. I all remember it. Just all seems to go by extremely fast.
You say somebody yelling train. So people on that float were trying to warn the driver of that truck that there was real danger.
Right. Somebody behind us. If you think about it, the arms that were coming down, my wife and I were kind of already almost past the train tracks. So we were already looking off to start waving to the next group of little kids. But one of the ladies behind us, we were up towards the front there, towards the rear, yelled train, and I just happened to look up and saw the arms, the crossing arms come down.
Heather...
Caught them kind of in the front of my chest and pushed her away.
Heather, you know, your husband did push you out of the way and got you off there. I mean, in effect, possibly saving your life. I mean, what do you remember from your vantage point?
I remember the guard coming down. I remember Richard yelling at me to jump, and I remember his hands on my back. And then the next thing I know, I was on the ground, and I saw my husband laying in a ball. I thought he was dead. He wasn't moving, didn't look like he was breathing. There was blood everywhere. He was just crumpled up, so I started screaming his name, and that's when he woke up.
You know, the tragic irony.
His legs.
The tragic irony in this is that this was a float carrying our veterans, our heroes who survived conflicts overseas. This was supposed to be a day to support them and show our appreciation for them, and this happens, Heather.
Yeah.
Was it hard to get your arms around that?
Yes.
Bob, I mean, clearly, according to the railroad, this crossing was working properly. The bells were apparently going off, as we've heard now several times. The arms were coming down. I know you're going to take some legal action today. Who do you hold responsible?
Well, you start out by knowing that you don't hold anybody that was on that float responsible. They were there to celebrate. This should never have happened, so you kind of work backwards, and there's reasons why this happened. It's going to take a while to sort out all those reasons. But one of the reasons it's obvious is the 20-second warning time is not a sufficient warning. You only have to go back to Fox River Grove, Illinois in 1995, October, to know what happens when you have a short warning time like this. In that instance, the busload of children were hit.
Right, I remember
in this
that.
instance, the same warning time in this case, and that is not the way that system was designed. I know it was designed for a 30-second warning time. That information is what we hope to bring to light.
Well, Bob, thank you very much. Heather, thank you. We're glad you're okay. And Sergeant, we hope you are back on your feet real soon.
I hope so, too. Want to get back in the fight.
Well, and thank you for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.